The perfect family on the surface. From the outside, Rebecca Miller's life was the very picture of American success. Every morning, she awoke to sunlight streaming through the windows of her brownstone townhouse in Manhattan's Upper West Side, the creak of the old hardwood floors beneath her feet, and the distant noise of the city below served as daily reminders of everything she had achieved. Not only was she the founder and CEO of her own marketing firm, one of the youngest women in New York City to make Forbes 40 Under 40, but she was also the centerpiece of what friends and acquaintances described as an ideal family. Her husband, Ethan Miller, was a partner at a prestigious law firm, tall, charming, and articulate. He was the kind of man who held doors open and remembered anniversaries. To everyone who knew them, Ethan and Rebecca were the quintessential power couple. Their home, always tastefully decorated, was filled with laughter during dinner parties and warmth during the quiet moments when it was just the two of them with a glass of wine and a new Netflix documentary. Whenever Ethan looked at Rebecca or took her hand across the dinner table, people remarked on the sincerity in his eyes. But if anyone could rival the closeness between Rebecca and Ethan, it was the bond she shared with her younger sister, Sophie. 6 years apart in age, their connection had begun in their modest Midwest upbringing, a tight-knit sisterhood forged by sharing secrets, tears, achievements, and ambitions. When Sophie was accepted to Columbia University, Rebecca had insisted she move in with them until you find your place. Even after Sophie graduated and found her own apartment nearby, it was common for her to drop by, sometimes unannounced, bringing fresh croissants or a new salad recipe to test for Sunday brunch. She and Rebecca confided in each other about everything, from career frustrations to dating mishaps. Rebecca always feeling protective, always eager to support Sophie's dreams. Rebecca took pride in balancing her demanding career with maintaining what she believed was true intimacy at home. She made an effort to keep tradition alive. Home-cooked meals on Sundays, summer trips to Cape Cod, phone calls with her parents every Friday. She cherished the compliments at gallery openings and charity galas. "You have it all, Rebecca. What's your secret?" And always smiled with gratitude, even as she laughed off the idea that any family was perfect. There were routines and rituals that grounded their life. Ethan's morning run, Rebecca's yoga in the sunroom, the three of them, Rebecca, Ethan, and Sophie, occasionally meeting at their favorite diner on weekends for pancakes and inside jokes. In family photos framed along the staircase, some slightly tilted as if to capture the spontaneity of their happiness, everyone radiated genuine affection. Rebecca believed her unwavering trust in Ethan and Sophie was well placed. She considered herself lucky to have a sister who was also a best friend and a husband who truly understood her. She often reminisced about childhood promises she and Sophie had made. "We'll always be there for each other, no matter what." Those words had become a kind of unspoken motto in her adult life, fueling her sense of security and pride. Yet beneath Rebecca's calm composure and the enviable tableau of her home, there were occasional moments, fleeting, easy to dismiss as inconsequential, when she'd catch a slight hesitation in Ethan's smile, or Sophie's glance lingering on something unspoken. In those moments, Rebecca would quickly brush away the thought, reminding herself that suspicion had no place in something as real and precious as her family. She had worked too hard, loved too deeply, and trusted too completely. Whatever shadows passed through the corners of her mind, she tried to will them away, holding ever tighter to the family she believed was, if not perfect, then at least perfectly hers. Subtle signs. It began with the small things, the details that only someone deeply attuned could notice. Rebecca, accustomed to managing a million moving parts between home and her bustling firm, rarely missed a beat. Lately, however, she sensed a change in the tempo of her family's routines, an off-key note that lingered at the edges of her otherwise harmonious daily life. Sophie's visits, once spontaneous and lighthearted, grew noticeably more frequent. She started stopping by on weekday evenings, not just on weekends or holidays. Sometimes she arrived before Rebecca made it home from work, her laughter echoing in the hallway as she and Ethan shared stories over an open bottle of red wine. Rebecca would walk in, tired but smiling, to find her sister comfortably curled up on the living room sofa as Ethan animatedly recounted a courtroom anecdote. Although Rebecca tried to convince herself she was just imagining it, a few times she caught a trace of awkwardness in the air. A split second of silence as the front door closed behind her. Conversations between Ethan and Sophie, once full of playful sibling-in-law banter, began to feel different. There were hushed tones from the kitchen when they thought Rebecca was out of earshot, laughter that stopped abruptly when she entered the room. During dinner, Ethan would sometimes reference an inside joke Rebecca didn't recognize, the sort of laughter that comes from shared experience. She brushed off these moments, reassuring herself it was simply the pleasure of family becoming closer, but a quiet doubt started to stir within. It wasn't just the in-person interactions. Rebecca noticed Ethan and Sophie exchanging more texts than before. One evening, Ethan's phone vibrated constantly during dinner. He apologized, saying it was a group chat from the firm, but when Rebecca glimpsed the lock screen, she saw Sophie's name repeated in the notifications. Later that night, while scrolling through her own phone, Rebecca stumbled upon a group selfie Sophie had posted, taken in their kitchen that very afternoon, captioned, "Just us, making new memories." She wasn't in the photo. It struck her that the daily realities of her home life were happening in little pieces she didn't always see. Rebecca's instincts, honed after years of reading both people and marketing trends, tried to alert her that something was wrong. Yet she second-guessed herself, wondering if it was the product of fatigue or jealousy. Was she reading too much into Sophie's fondness for Ethan's stories, or the way Ethan praised Sophie's new recipes just a little too enthusiastically? One morning, while pouring coffee, Rebecca overheard Sophie ask Ethan for advice on a career decision, bridging into personal topics she used to share with Rebecca alone. The shifting boundaries, the invisible lines being crossed, made Rebecca uneasy. Then came the mysterious phone calls. Once Rebecca woke early and heard Ethan softly talking on the phone downstairs. When she asked who had called so early, Ethan mumbled, "Just work, nothing important." Another time, Sophie left the room abruptly when her own phone rang, whispering as she closed the door. They seemed to be sharing secrets in a house where everything was meant to be open. Despite all these signs, Rebecca kept telling herself she was overanalyzing. Work stress, she reasoned, sometimes made her too sensitive. She blamed herself for perhaps not being present enough, for letting the demands of boardrooms and business deals wear away at the foundations of intimacy. She even wondered if she was projecting her own insecurities onto the people she loved most. Yet every small detail added weight to the growing feeling inside her. Glances held just a moment too long. Shared smiles that excluded her. Late night whispers that faded when she approached. Rebecca tried to drown out her suspicions, choosing trust as she always had. Still, late at night, when the city outside quieted and the only sound in the townhouse was her own restless breathing, doubt crept in, persistent and chilling. Unaware of just how dramatically her life was about to change, Rebecca clung to her routine, her yoga in the sunroom, her work calls, her weekly brunch plans, doing all she could to preserve the image of a united family. But cracks had begun to form, and for the first time, Rebecca wondered if happiness could ever truly be as flawless as it looked from the outside. The truth revealed, Rebecca had always believed that trust was the strongest foundation of both love and kinship. For years, her certainty in Ethan and Sophie had been unshakable, allowing her to focus on work, on building a happy home, and on providing for those she cherished. But a single, ordinary Tuesday evening would upend everything she thought she knew. The day began as unremarkably as any other. Rebecca left her office a little earlier than usual. A last-minute client cancellation, granting her a rare chance to surprise her family with homemade pasta. The sun was just beginning to set over the city as she unlocked the front door, the routine scents of lavender cleaner and fresh lilies drifting through the entryway. She called out, expecting laughter or the sound of the TV, but the house was strangely quiet. As she made her way towards the back, passing the living room, kitchen, and sunroom, she noticed the study door was firmly shut, an oddity since that room was rarely used after dinner. A faint murmur carried through the thick oak. Rebecca hesitated, one hand on the doorknob, then gently pushed the door open. What she saw would etch itself into her memory forever. Ethan sat at the desk, Sophie perched beside him, their hands entangled. Not just a moment of comfort, but something unmistakably intimate. Sophie's face was flushed with emotion. Ethan's eyes flickered with guilt and panic the instant he noticed Rebecca. For a few heartbeats, no one moved or spoke. The silence roared, heavy as thunder. Rebecca's first reaction was paralysis, a kind of numb disbelief that divorced her from reality. She stood there, frozen, her mind struggling to make sense of the scene in front of her. The two people she trusted most, her husband and her own sister, were sharing a secret that had no place in her home. The air grew thick with shame and betrayal. Finally, Sophie jumped up, words tumbling out amidst tears. "Rebecca, I'm so sorry. It's not what you think. Please let me explain." Ethan tried to reach for Rebecca's hand, desperation written across his face, but she instinctively stepped back, feeling the walls closing in. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. Memories flashed. Sophie's frequent visits, the shared laughter, the lingering glances. Every puzzle piece clicked into place, forming an image she could no longer deny. Rebecca's shock gave way to a core-deep ache. Her vision blurred as waves of pain washed over her, rooted not only in her husband's infidelity, but in the betrayal of the sister she had protected for so long. The sense of violation hit her twice over, raw and overwhelming. She didn't scream or cry out or demand explanations. Not yet. Instead, something inside her shut down, the self-preservation instincts of a woman who's weathered boardrooms and betrayals before. She steadied herself, mustering what dignity she could before whispering, "Don't, just don't." Without another word, Rebecca turned and left the study, stumbling upstairs before the confrontation could devolve further. Each step felt heavier, as if she were climbing against the weight of her entire world collapsing. She locked herself in her bedroom, collapsed on the edge of the bed, and tried to slow her breathing. For a long time, she sat in the dark, mind racing through every moment, every overlooked sign. The night passed in a haze. She listened to muted arguments downstairs, soft footsteps, a door quietly closing, images from earlier replayed in relentless loop, Sophie's trembling hands, Ethan's haunted stare. The home that once felt like her sanctuary now seemed like a stage for deceit. As the city's lights slowly dimmed, Rebecca wept for the family she thought she had, for the trust that had been broken so completely. But somewhere beneath the devastation, a seed of resolve began to take root, a faint whisper that reminded her who she was. She would not let this betrayal define her. Not yet, not ever. Into the abyss of despair. Rebecca barely remembered how she made it through the remainder of that night. She drifted through the shadows of her once cheerful home, her movements automatic and mechanical, her thoughts too jagged to bear. Every room seemed changed. Each echo in the hallway, each painting or photograph on the wall, every item that had only a day ago belonged to the world she had so carefully built. Now they felt alien, hollow reminders of a happiness she realized had never been as solid as she believed. She didn't turn on any lights. Instead, she let the darkness settle around her, an anesthetic for her battered soul. In the dim orange glow of the city outside, filtered through curtains and slatted blinds, Rebecca curled up on the love seat in her bedroom, knees drawn to her chest, arms wrapped tight as if to hold herself together. For a long time, she simply breathed, staring at nothing, feeling the dull ache in her chest as something heavy and unmovable pressed down upon her. Whenever she closed her eyes, the memory replayed. Sophie's hand in Ethan's, the way they'd looked up, faces pale with guilt, as if caught in a nightmare they'd half wished for and half dreaded. The silence in that split second had been louder than any argument. Rebecca wondered how long the two of them had walked this dangerous edge, how many months, or even years, she'd missed the signs. She remembered Sophie's laughter, Ethan's familiar touch, both now tainted by hidden intentions. The betrayal didn't come in one clean, sharp blow, but hundreds of tiny cuts. All the time she'd shared a meal, a joke, a memory. Not knowing the truth simmering beneath the surface, doubt clung to her like a second skin, its voice insidious and persistent in the stillness. How much of her life had been a lie? Did Ethan regret the choices he'd made? Or had he found something with Sophie that Rebecca never could give him? Had Sophie ever truly valued their sisterhood? Or had envy always lingered just under her smile? Rebecca sobbed then, not the loud, racking cries of catharsis, but small, broken sounds she tried to swallow. It was grief, but also humiliation. She felt exposed, stripped of dignity, ashamed that those closest to her had decided she was not enough. She thought of calling a friend, but the idea seemed impossible. How could she put words to the raw wounds inside, to the devastation that reached so deeply? Instead, she sat alone, the silence amplifying every insecurity. She replayed every recent conversation, every shared moment, as if desperate to find some clue or warning she should have noticed. Was it her fault? Had her focus on the company left a vacuum in her marriage? Had she been too trusting, too eager to believe that love was enough? Hours passed, marked only by the shift from night to dawn. She didn't sleep. Instead, she wandered like a ghost through her own home. In the kitchen, the scent of last night's uneaten dinner clung to the air. Her cell phone vibrated atop the marble counter. Texts from Sophie, from Ethan, from her mother, all left unread. Across the room, Rebecca saw the bouquet Ethan had bought for their anniversary just the week before, now wilting in its vase. Such a gesture felt mocking, empty. She moved through the rooms, collecting fragments of who she'd been. Family portraits on the staircase, all wide smiles and laughter. Sophie, arms slung over Rebecca's shoulders, at a holiday party. Ethan kissing her cheek, at their wedding. It was impossible to say when the mask had slipped, when the undercurrents had overturned the surface. Grief gave way to anger, white hot and consuming. Anger at Ethan for betraying vows, at Sophie for violating sacred trust, and at herself for having believed she was immune to such tragedy. By mid-morning, the apartment filled with weak fall sunlight, spilling over familiar furniture now tinged with accusation. The quiet was unbearable. Rebecca showered on autopilot, the water scalding until her skin was red, hoping maybe pain could replace pain. She dressed mechanically, pulling on a cashmere sweater she didn't remember buying. Every movement felt foreign, every reflection unfamiliar. She heard footsteps somewhere in the house, hushed voices behind closed doors. Sophie must have spent the night, or maybe had nowhere else to go. Ethan kept his distance, perhaps knowing his presence would only further injure what little remained of their marriage. Occasionally, a text would appear on Rebecca's phone. "Can we talk?" from Sophie. "I'm so sorry" from Ethan. But she deleted them all without reading further. She refused to listen to apologies that could never make things right. Isolation settled in, an oppressive weight. Rebecca tried to distract herself with work. Emails, reports, calls she forced herself to return. Yet her mind drifted, every number and word a reminder of the chaos just outside her locked office door. She wondered how long she could keep up the facade. Would her employees notice, her partners? Would she be able to offer them the same calm guidance? Or would the cracks in her composure eventually burst into the open? The need for answers gnawed at her. One afternoon, unable to bear her own imagination, Rebecca quietly scoured the house for evidence. Old messages on Ethan's laptop or Sophie's forgotten notebook. She was driven not by a desire for punishment, not yet, but rather a desperate hunt for understanding. How could two people she had loved and trusted conspire to break her heart? The more she searched, the more she recognized patterns. Sophie's possessions left in odd places, Ethan's late-night absences, all the things she dismissed as coincidence. At night, sleep did not come. Rebecca lay awake, counting patterns in the ceiling, wrestling with every emotion at once: rage, grief, loneliness, longing, resolve. At times, she considered leaving, just walking out into the city and becoming someone else. Other times, she imagined confronting them both, screaming until the walls shook. But neither option felt right yet. She was trapped in an in-between space, not ready to forgive or to fight, but unwilling to retreat. A few friends reached out when Rebecca missed lunch plans or skipped the gym. She offered only the vaguest of excuses, voice hollow and forced. She feared their comfort, worried that if she allowed herself the luxury of falling apart, she might never find the strength to gather herself again. It was in these bleak days that the deepest pain revealed its cruel lesson. The people you love most are the only ones with the power to truly destroy you. Rebecca was left to confront the ruins of her trust, to look at herself in the mirror and see not a wife, not a sister, not a CO, but something emptied out, a vessel waiting to decide what to fill herself with next. Yet even in her darkest hours, an ember of self-preservation began to flicker. Rebecca realized she did not want her story to end like this. The despair, for all its merciless grip, would not define her. There was a part of her, stubborn and unyielding, that whispered of survival, of clarity and action. Before she could rebuild, before she could even truly grieve, she needed to face the truth in its full brutality. Pain, she now understood, could be a crucible. And so Rebecca waited quietly in the depths of her anguish, gathering the pieces of her heart and her pride. Somewhere beyond the sorrow, she sensed the first tremors of resolve. But for now, she allowed herself to mourn, allowed herself to break, knowing that it was only in breaking that something new and stronger could rise from the wreckage. Laying the groundwork for revenge, the earliest morning light found Rebecca standing by the window, eyes fixed on the awakening cityscape. Her old self, a woman whose world revolved around trust, had been burned away in the fires of betrayal. What remained was quieter, sharper, and now singularly focused. She had wept for her marriage, for her sisterhood, for the future that had been stolen from her. Now, beneath the ashes, anger began knitting itself to resolve. A resolve not merely to survive, but to reclaim agency over her own story. For the first time in days, Rebecca felt clarity begin to cut through the fog. It started as a question. If her family had plotted in secret, how could she ever be sure of anything again? But soon, a new mantra replaced the old. If trust was her weakness, preparation would be her power. She set her jaw, wiped away the last remnants of grief from her cheeks, and started to plan. Step 1. Legal counsel and psychological armor. Rebecca's first action was to call her own attorney, a seasoned Manhattan litigator named Julia Prescott, who'd handled complex corporate deals for her firm, but was also known for her savvy in high net worth divorce cases. They met in a discreet corner of a private club for breakfast, Julia arriving with a notebook and the air of someone who could never be surprised. Rebecca recounted everything, from the first seeds of suspicion to the devastating confrontation in the study. Julia listened, unflinching but sympathetic. then began outlining a playbook. Gather evidence, secure the assets, and anticipate counter moves, both legal and emotional. Julia recommended another specialist as well, a trusted therapist, Dr. Matthew Klein, who could help Rebecca protect her mental health and maintain composure in front of Ethan and Sophie. You'll need a fortress, Julia cautioned, not just for your money, but for your mind. They'll expect guilt, tears, confusion. Give them none of it. You need to become unreadable. Step 2. Gathering evidence. Rebecca's next imperative was information. If she wanted any hope of protecting herself, financially, emotionally, even legally, she needed irrefutable proof. What began as a desperate search for answers the night of her discovery transformed into a cold, methodical process. She backed up Ethan's text messages and emails, quietly forwarding copies to her own cloud drive. She installed discrete security software on the home Wi-Fi, enabling her to monitor unusual activity. At work, she trained herself to smile as if nothing had changed, using every free moment to catalog social media posts, bank account statements, and shared digital calendars, looking for discrepancies and overlap. Rebecca bought a small voice recorder, legal in New York so long as she was party to the conversation, and kept it in her pocket for any direct encounters. She even reviewed months of transactions from their joint accounts, compiling a spreadsheet detailing every odd purchase, every transfer, and every subtle sign that Sophie and Ethan had been laying the groundwork for their own escape. To her surprise and mounting anger, there were more anomalies than she'd anticipated. Receipts for dinners, trips, even gifts that had been disguised as business expenses or sisterly outings. She also collected physical evidence, stray pieces of Sophie's clothing left in odd, intimate corners of the house, tickets to events Rebecca herself hadn't attended, a necklace she'd once given Sophie, now seen in an anonymous Instagram photo from Ethan's favorite restaurant, one by one. She built a portfolio designed not only to prove their betrayal, but to confront them at the precise moment and with the precise audience she would choose. Step 3. Reclaiming control over assets. Armed with legal advice, Rebecca began a restructuring of the family's tangled finances. She revisited the ownership documents for the townhouse, the vacation home, investment portfolios, and especially the shares of her marketing firm. Several assets, she realized, had been listed under both her and Ethan's names for tax reasons. It was time to consolidate control. Under Julia's guidance, Rebecca gradually shifted ownership of the most valuable properties to trusts controlled solely by herself. She scheduled meetings with accountants to shore up weak points in her company's governance, quietly removing Ethan's access and canceling secondary credit cards. In joint investment accounts, she initiated background reviews for unusual transactions, invoking her right as a principal without drawing suspicion. To Sophie, Rebecca was all smiles, offering advice, sending small gifts, and inviting her to brunch at their favorite spot. To Ethan, she became warmer, more present, suggesting couples dinners and even planning a little getaway to reconnect. If either of them noticed her new attentiveness, they seemed to see it only as a sign that she was moving on from the emotional fallout, not realizing they were being gently herded into the trap. Step 4. Emotional deception, the art of the mask. Rebecca understood now that rage and hurt, while powerful, had to be hidden if her plan was to succeed. On the surface, she played the role of the forgiving, slightly distracted wife and the supportive, affectionate sister. She sent warm texts to Sophie, left sweet notes for Ethan, and insisted on maintaining family rituals, even as she felt her stomach twist at every gathered meal. Dr. Klein encouraged her to journal her feelings every night, offloading the poison so you can wear your mask more convincingly. Rebecca wrote page after page, not just about her pain, but about her plans, detailing the small manipulations, the moments she nearly slipped, the surprising kindness she found in Julia and Dr. Klein. She practiced her smile in the bathroom mirror every morning and night until it looked effortless again. Sometimes she would sit alone at the dining table after dark, rehearsing possible confrontations, testing her poker face in the reflective glass of their bay window. Step 5. Planning the grand reveal. Rebecca's final step, one that required strategic patience, was to select the precise moment and method for what Julia called the formal unmasking. She didn't want a dramatic, private confrontation. She wanted maximum impact and a witness to every lie. The idea crystallized in late autumn as she planned a family get-together for her and Ethan's wedding anniversary. All their closest relatives and friends would be invited, including colleagues who'd admired Rebecca's supposedly perfect marriage. Her plan was almost theatrical. Gather everyone in a celebration of family and endurance, let the false smiles fade naturally, and then, only when the audience was assembled and least expecting it, present the irrefutable evidence of betrayal and deceit. There would be no shouting, no wild accusations, just facts, cold and devastating, delivered by a woman who refused to let betrayal define her. As Rebecca watched the RSVP list grow and tasted the quiet satisfaction of preparation, she realized something within her had changed. She was no longer waiting in fear or grief. She was reclaiming her narrative on her terms, in her time. The pain remained, but it was now laced with something fiercer: purpose, strategy, and an emerging vision of justice. The subtle trap. Rebecca's vengeance was not the stuff of impulsive tantrums or reckless accusations. It was a game of chess played with expertise, each move disguised by empathy, each maneuver masked with a smile. She knew now that the most effective traps were not built on anger, but on patience, precision, and the steady hand of a woman betrayed too deeply to let her emotions rule her actions. In the weeks leading up to her planned revelation, Rebecca cultivated an atmosphere of forgiveness and togetherness around her home. Where there had once been cool distance and avoidance, now unfurled warmth and a gentle return to established rituals. She invited Sophie for coffee, insisted Ethan take time off for family nights, even suggested they all revisit cherished places, flipping through old family albums, organizing closet treasures, going to the theater together as if nothing had changed. Every detail was intentional, every conversation subtly, leading Sophie and Ethan to lower their guards. Rebecca made herself present, attentive, and, when necessary, vulnerable. She offered apologies for working late or missing a dinner, joking about her workaholic tendencies, and expressing genuine gratitude for the patience of her loved ones. Inside, every fiber of her being warred against the performance. Still, she reminded herself, every act served her purpose. The more comfortable Ethan and Sophie grew in this false lull, the more they revealed. Every affectionate glance, every inside joke, every digital paper trail they left, Rebecca now noticed and documented with dispassionate precision. During this time, Rebecca gradually executed her plans around assets and finances with subtlety worthy of a master tactician. She organized a family review of investment portfolios, presenting it as a clever way to increase returns and charities. She suggested updating the townhouse's deed so it reflected new estate tax recommendations, gently guiding Ethan into signing over his share to a trust managed solely by her. Whenever Ethan or Sophie raised questions, she had answers ready. Julia says this will save us thousands if something ever happens to one of us. Or the accountant swears this is what all the best-run families are doing. The two signed, never suspecting that the signatures disguised their slow exclusion from every asset of consequence. Sophie, for her part, was pulled in by Rebecca's newfound confidence. Long accustomed to Rebecca's support, she basked in her sister's apparent forgiveness. Rebecca encouraged Sophie's ideas for a catering startup, even volunteering to become an early investor when things settled down. She gifted Sophie an elegant necklace for her birthday, an inexpensive bauble, but one Sophie wore everywhere. "You're my family, no matter what. We always have each other's backs," Rebecca whispered as she clasped it, carefully hiding the chill in her own heart. Behind the scenes, Rebecca orchestrated a complete audit of family finances, insurance papers, and digital access. She slowly and quietly transferred access to critical accounts, banking, utilities, retirement funds, so Ethan's role shrank to a passive observer. She set up new business accounts in the marketing firm, adding legal layers that shielded it from community asset claims. To both her sister and her husband, she projected nothing but calm, generosity, and trust. But the final touch of the trap was her meticulous planning for the upcoming family event, their wedding anniversary. Rebecca framed it as a celebration, not just of marriage, but of perseverance and second chances, inviting family from both sides, close friends, loyal colleagues, and even a few mutual acquaintances who had remarked on the couple's seemingly unbreakable bond. She hired a photographer, ordered elaborate floral arrangements, and had a custom cake made, the sort of production that would signal to everyone outside that the Miller household had weathered its storms. Rebecca's invitations brimmed with sincerity. She wrote, "Join us in honoring the journey, the strength of family, and the promise that love, for all its heartache, compels us to grow." She crafted heartfelt toasts, rehearsed warm greetings, even planned candid family games to evoke laughter and nostalgia. Through it all, she smiled, though every moment demanded seismic self-control. What Sophie and Ethan could not suspect was the amount of surveillance built into the new era of openness. Rebecca had set up new home security cameras, disguised as air purifiers and music speakers, covertly recording interactions for legal purposes. She created separate digital journals, one for legal collection, one for her therapist, that tracked every odd occurrence, every dalliance, every hesitation, and late-night whisper. If any doubt about her story arose, She would have the timelines and evidence ready. The days grew closer to the anniversary, each one a test of Rebecca's composure. In public, she was the adored hostess and witty storyteller, lavish in praise of her wonderful husband and invaluable sister. She downplayed work triumphs in favor of sharing small victories from family life. Privately, she vented only behind Dr. Klein's door or in her most protected journal entries. There, she cataloged her nightmares, her longing for release, her guilt at the pleasure she sometimes took in her growing power. In the evenings, she sometimes caught her reflection and did not recognize the woman who stared back. Calm, calculating, almost serene, but she reminded herself of the stakes. This was not just retribution for herself, but a reclaiming of dignity ripped away by those she had championed most loyally. The subtle trap was not about cruelty. It was about truth brought into the light so that those who had hidden in shadows would have nowhere left to run. On the eve of the event, Rebecca walked the halls of her home, running her hand along the polished banister, checking every table. In each framed memory, she felt the ghosts of every betrayal mingle with the anticipation of closure to come. For just a moment, fear flickered through her. What if her courage failed? What if her evidence was dismissed? What if the pain at the heart of her family never truly faded? She tamped it down, placing the final folder, documents, printouts, photographs, in the safe behind her closet. She could hear the laughter of Ethan and Sophie echoing, oblivious, from the kitchen below. Tomorrow, the world would see what she had endured, and those closest to her would be forced to face the consequence of secrets too long disguised as affection. As midnight neared, Rebecca sat at her desk, reading through her prepared statement one last time. She didn't need to scream, to punish, to rage. Her victory would be found in composure, in the simple elegance of truth. Only then, with the trap fully set, would she finally begin to reclaim herself from the wreckage. The reunion night, the truth unveiled. The night air was crisp, the city skyline glimmering in the distance as Rebecca watched the last strand of fairy lights twinkle along her townhouse balcony. It was their wedding anniversary, but this year the celebration was larger. Guests flooded in, family from both sides, close friends, respected colleagues, and extended relatives who hadn't visited in years. The house pulsed with warm chatter and laughter, and on the surface, everything sparkled with the charm of a perfect reunion. Rebecca greeted each guest with effortless grace, a light touch on the arm, a well-timed compliment, the signature Rebecca Miller smile. Throughout the evening, she floated from group to group, always attentive, always in control, her presence radiating composure. Only her therapist and attorney, quietly blending into the crowd, knew of the storm gathering beneath her calm. Inside the living room, soft jazz hummed in the background. Waiters circled with trays of champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres. Sophie wore the necklace Rebecca had gifted her, laughing easily with friends, entirely at ease. Ethan, beside the bar, charmed Rebecca's parents with funny stories of their early days together. Guests commented on how lovely it all was, and Rebecca accepted every compliment graciously, thanking them for being witness to a journey marked by forgiveness and family. As the evening progressed, games and toasts added to the illusion of unity. Old photographs were passed around, from the sisters' childhood in the Midwest to professional milestones, birthday cakes, and vacations by the Cape. Rebecca held the photos for just a moment longer than necessary, as if weighing each memory for its current worth, then let each one go. Dinner concluded with a toast. Rebecca stood at the head of the table, glass raised, voice steady. "To family," she began, her eyes sweeping the room and finding Sophie's face. Then Ethan's. "To second chances, to perseverance, and above all, to truth, the real foundation of any lasting bond." There was a ripple of polite laughter, clinking crystal, but the subtle sharpness in her words went largely unnoticed. Dessert was served. The custom cake, a layered confection sculpted with sugar flowers, captured so much of what the Millers had projected to the world: beauty, intricacy, a flawless facade. Rebecca sliced the first piece, passing it to Ethan with a tight-lipped smile. The evening's orchestration had been flawless, but now it was time for the final act. Rebecca caught her attorney's eye. Julia, in turn, nodded to the technician Rebecca had quietly hired. Lights dimmed, music faded, and Rebecca's voice, calm but resonant, floated over the room as she stepped forward with the remote for the projector. "If I could have everyone's attention for a few minutes," she began. "I'd like to share something important. This evening is about more than anniversaries. It's about reflection and honesty. Sometimes the truths we bury the deepest have a way of surfacing. Tonight, I want to show you what that looks like." All eyes found her, some expectant, some amused, a few puzzled. The projector flared to life. On the screen appeared carefully compiled evidence. Photographs of Sophie and Ethan together, in settings not explained by family visits, time-stamped text logs showing inappropriate intimacy, credit card transactions that matched outings they hadn't admitted, and a sequence of images that could leave no room for denial. Each piece appeared in sequence, presented without rancor, just the steady, relentless march of fact after fact. Within seconds, shocked gasps pricked the room. A stunned silence fell as Rebecca continued. "For months, I asked myself if I was imagining things, if by loving too hard or working too much, I had given my loved ones reason to hide. Tonight, I realize it was never about me being enough or not. The people I trusted most chose secrecy over truth. So let's finally invite everything into the light." Her voice never wavered. Her attorney stood a silent sentinel nearby, ensuring there could be no legal threat or accusation of slander. Sophie's face drained of color. Ethan sat rigid, his jaw clenched, unable to look at Rebecca or at anyone. Murmurs spread across the room. Rebecca's parents turned from Ethan in horror, a few guests reaching out to steady Zoe, who was sinking into her seat, the shame unmistakable. Rebecca laid out the story, the escalation of secret meetings, the coded text exchanges, the gifts meant to go unnoticed. She paused occasionally, letting each revelation sink in, never raising her voice, never releasing the mask of composure she'd spent weeks perfecting. She invited Sophie and Ethan to speak. Sophie managed only guttural apologies through tears, unable to meet her sister's gaze. "I never meant to hurt you, Rebecca. I'm so sorry." Ethan tried to stammer explanations about loneliness, about mistakes, about one thing leading to another, but even he seemed to realize nothing he could say would change what had happened, not in front of witnesses who now knew the full extent of their betrayal. Rebecca did not give in to anger or melodrama. Instead, she turned toward the guests. Betrayal shatters the stories we tell ourselves and the ones we tell the world. I wanted all of you to see the truth because I no longer want to live inside a lie. She let the words echo, looking toward those who mattered most. Her friends and colleagues rallied to her side. Some wept openly, others offered quiet words of support, their faith in Rebecca undimmed by the spectacle unfolding before them. Her parents, stunned and devastated, finally stood, joining Rebecca and carefully placing a loving hand on her shoulder. The city hummed outside, distant and indifferent, but within her home, a reckoning had come to pass. The formalities ended, but the shock lingered. Guests gathered around Rebecca, offering warmth and affirmation. Some turned away from Sophie and Ethan, whispering about what would happen next. For Sophie, there was no hiding from the shame, etched into every sympathetic glance, every averted gaze. Ethan, stripped of his usual confidence, looked utterly lost. As the night wound down and guests departed, Rebecca stood at the doorway thanking them for coming, the weight of her own resolution now palpable. A few close friends lingered, making sure she wasn't alone. Her parents embraced her tightly, and for the first time in months, Rebecca felt a flicker of relief that the truth, however painful, had finally been voiced. When the last guest had left and the house had quieted, Rebecca moved through rooms now echoing with different memories. She poured herself a glass of wine and stepped out onto the balcony, letting the night air wash over her. Below, the city sparkled, indifferent but alive. Behind her, the ruins of deception. Before her, possibility, unwritten and undaunted. For perhaps the first time since the betrayal, Rebecca felt whole. The truth had been dragged into the light, not with rage, but with dignity. The story of her family, the real one, could finally begin again. Reclaiming justice. In the wake of the anniversary's cataclysmic revelations, Rebecca's home was transformed. Where laughter and secrets had once mingled, now silence reigned, heavy, expectant, uncompromising. The masks had fallen. The truth, once contained to fleeting doubts and nighttime anguish, now hung in the air like the city's late fall fog, settling into every corner. Yet for Rebecca, this was not the end. In fact, it was only the beginning. She was done being powerless. It was time to reclaim justice. The very next morning, Rebecca awoke before dawn. The city outside was still shadowed and restless, a mirror to her own turbulent spirit. Yet she felt an unfamiliar clarity rooted deep within her, a sense of rightness and resolve that allowed her to rise without trembling. As she slipped on her tailored navy suit and tied back her hair with practiced efficiency, she almost smiled to realize she no longer needed to perform strength. She simply was strong. With calm determination, Rebecca called Julia Prescott, the steely attorney who had become not only her legal counsel, but a trusted ally. By mid-morning, they were seated once again in the private conference room at Julia's firm, a fortress of dark wood and glass, high above the pulsing Manhattan streets. They moved quickly and decisively. Rebecca produced a thick folder of evidence, photos, transaction logs, messages. her months of painstaking surveillance distilled into a precise narrative. With every document passed and every hard truth spoken aloud, Rebecca felt another piece of her old vulnerability slip away. Julia guided her through the legal process, drafting divorce papers that left little room for negotiation, freezing access to joint accounts and credit cards, formally challenging Ethan's claim to half the marital assets through ironclad prenuptials and recent trust transfers. The townhouse, the vacation home, the investment portfolios, and control of the marketing firm all were locked tightly in place, safe from hasty liquidation or spiteful sabotage. There was no bitterness in Rebecca's actions, just righteous protection. She told Julia, "I don't want vengeance, not really. I just want what I've built to remain mine. I want them out, and I want closure." Julia nodded, a rare glimmer of admiration in her eyes. "You're doing this the right way, Rebecca? Not with anger, with clarity. It'll hold up, no matter how much they want to fight." The legal wheels turned rapidly. Court summons and papers were served. Ethan received his packet at work, a burn of humiliating whispers circulating among his law firm colleagues. Sophie's came via registered mail, trailed by stunned calls from her own social circle. Both tried to reach Rebecca. Ethan left voicemails that morphed from pleading to indignant. Sophie sent long, rambling emails thick with apology and self-pity. Rebecca read none of them. For her, the lines of communication were now closed. Her part in their story had ended at the moment of betrayal, and nothing they said could rewrite it. Within days, Ethan was forced to vacate the townhouse that had been the stage of their life together. Julia arranged for Rebecca to be the sole legal occupant pending the divorce settlement. Rebecca returned home one evening to find his closet empty, his favorite leather satchel gone from its hook, his last tie abandoned on the back of a chair. She stood in the silence, feeling a surprising peace settle through the empty space. It was her sanctuary again, not a museum of shared pretense, but the beginning of something new. Sophie, too, faded from Rebecca's daily life. No more unannounced visits, no fresh-baked pastries on Sunday mornings. Word of their scandal had spread within their mutual circles, and Sophie withdrew, shamed and ostracized not by Rebecca's doing, but by her own actions revealed. In rare, awkward encounters, at a friend's baby shower or a public fundraiser, Sophie kept her eyes cast downward, her voice barely above a whisper. To Rebecca's surprise, there was no pleasure in seeing her sister so diminished, only a vague regret, the faint echo of a sibling bond unraveled. The divorce proceedings moved smoothly, thanks to Rebecca's foresight and Julia's skill. At the first court hearing, the judge reviewed the evidence, the timing of asset transfers, the clear violations of marital trust. Ethan and his attorney made protests, but their efforts were weak, undermined by irrefutable facts. Rebecca's methodical records and her flawless composure under questioning. Eventually, Ethan agreed to the final terms. He forfeited his share in the marketing firm, the townhouse, and all major investments. In return, Rebecca waived any claim on his future income and allowed him to keep his private retirement account. When the judgment was read, Ethan stood silent and shell-shocked, as if only now understanding that his greatest loss was not material, but the erasure of all he had once meant to her. For Rebecca, the most difficult moment did not occur in a courtroom or conference room, but during a quiet evening When her parents came to visit, the air felt thick with worry and unshed tears. Her mother took her hand and, voice trembling, whispered, "You did absolutely nothing to deserve this, darling. We are proud of your strength." Her father, stoic as always, simply embraced Rebecca without words. For the first time, she wept freely, the tears not of despair, but of relief and exhausted gratitude. Justice, she realized, was not always about retribution. It was about putting the pieces back into hands that would respect them. In the following weeks, Rebecca settled into her new reality. The office, once a refuge from pain, became the center of her rebuilt confidence. She poured her energy into the business, inspiring her team, seeking out new opportunities, and mentoring other women who had weathered betrayal. Her story, a whisper at first, spread as inspiration among employees and peers alike, not of scandal, but of steadfastness, of choosing dignity over drama, action over bitterness. Rebecca also took time for herself. Long walks in Central Park, afternoons at the art museum, quiet lunches with the few friends who had stood by her side. She signed up for a cooking class, remembering all the joyful meals she wanted to rediscover. She began therapy in earnest, not just to heal, but to understand, and eventually to forgive. Not for Ethan or Sophie's sake, but for her own. Most nights, she returned to a home that no longer felt haunted. The silence was not lonely anymore, but restful. Photos remained on the walls, but each now claimed its proper place in memory, not as a shelter for illusion. Justice, Rebecca learned, was not a single moment of victory, but a series of choices. Each day, reclaiming another inch of her own power, another fragment of herself. She felt no need to brag, to parade her recovery. Quietly, privately, she built a life that, though redefined, was wholly, finally, her own rebirth. In the darkness, in the months following her pursuit of justice, Rebecca found herself alone in ways she had never imagined. The townhouse, once alive with early morning laughter, the rich aroma of fresh coffee, and the comfortable rhythms of partnership, now greeted her each evening with hushed stillness. The silence pressed in at first, a chilling reminder of all she had lost, whispering old doubts into the night. But as winter gave way to the tentative warmth of spring, Rebecca began to discern something new in the quiet, the chance not just to endure, but to transform. She started by clearing out the relics of her old life. With the same methodical patience that had served her through the trials, Rebecca opened closets, pulled dusty boxes from shelves, and let her hands move methodically through each item. Wedding mementos, anniversary gifts, love notes in Ethan's slanted handwriting. What once had been sacred became simply objects, then surrendered to charity, recycling, or the trash. Each act of letting go felt sharp at first, but also freeing. The townhouse lost the calcified air of a mausoleum and gradually took on the freshness of possibility. Books returned to their rightful places, art was rehung to reflect her taste alone, and Rebecca filled the kitchen with the sense of food cooked just for herself. She subscribed to a farm co op, ordered cookbooks in languages she'd never learned, and experimented nightly, rediscovering the pleasure of feeding only her own hunger. The sheer ordinariness of self care became a quiet rebellion against the drama and heartbreak of the past year. The hardest part was allowing herself to reconnect with her own body, her mind, and the people who remained. At first, Rebecca kept her friends and colleagues at arm's length, worried that pain would leak from her every gesture. But isolation proved corrosive. It was in a cozy Brooklyn cafe, over black coffee, with her old college friend Dana, that Rebecca allowed herself to put words to her pain. "I'm not broken," she said quietly, "but I don't recognize who I am anymore." Dana simply squeezed her hand and replied, "That's how you know you're about to become someone new." Rebecca threw herself into work, but not as an escape. She became the steady center of her marketing firm, no longer the frenetic perfectionist boss, but a leader tempered by experience and humility. She initiated mentorship programs for young women, sponsored networking events, and hosted brown bag lunches, where she shared advice as honestly as she dared. Her ordeal, once a source of deep shame, became proof not of weakness, but of extraordinary resilience. Through therapy, Rebecca dug beneath the anger and grief to discover places within herself that had been neglected long before the betrayal. She realized how easily she had lost herself in her marriage, how much of her energy had been spent tending to others' needs, smoothing over their disappointments, making her own sacrifices seem trivial for the sake of harmony. Dr. Klein, wise and patient, guided her through the slow, uneven process of learning to attend to her own desires. "You're allowed," he reminded her, "to want something for yourself, simply because you want it, not because it fixes someone else." She took the advice to heart. On weekends, Rebecca would wander art galleries alone, sketchbook in hand, noticing which paintings stirred her, which colors called out. She signed up for a pottery class, relishing the feel of cool clay spinning through her fingers, the messiness and the imperfection that no one else needed to see. Sometimes she'd lose herself among the benches in Central Park, letting the sun warm her skin and the crowds remind her that solitude and loneliness were not the same. Her relationship with her family, especially her parents, went through carefully negotiated stages of repair. They visited often, sometimes lingering over coffee in the morning, talking less about what happened and more about what might come next. Rebecca realized that to her parents, her survival was strength in itself. She leaned into their pride, letting their faith become her own. A turning point arrived unexpectedly in late April. One evening, after an exhausting day, Rebecca discovered a letter slipped under her door. The handwriting was familiar, Sophie's. Heart pounding, she hesitated before opening it, steeling herself for old wounds to reopen. Yet as she read, her breath softened. The words were a true confession. Humble and unadorned, Sophie's letter did not ask for forgiveness. Instead, it admitted her envy, her loneliness, and her deep regret. She wrote, "I see now how much love I've thrown away, and how what I thought was happiness was just a shadow. You were always a strong one, even when I resented it. I'm doing the work to understand why I hurt you, and I'm not asking for anything except your hope that I can someday learn to deserve your kindness again." Sophie ended, No matter what, you are my sister. That will never change. Rebecca sat with the letter for a long time, her feelings turbulent but not destructive. Beneath her anger and sadness, she recognized the faint stirring of compassion. She understood at last that her rebirth would never come through a vengeance or victory, but through accepting the brokenness in others, without letting it poison what remained good within herself. As spring blossomed fully around her, Rebecca's life became a tapestry of deliberate choices. She sought out new friendships, embraced hobbies without shame, and began to travel, first to Boston, then Los Angeles, then farther afield. She donated to women's shelters, spoke about recovery and hope at community events, and learned to sleep well again, her room no longer haunted by the past. Truthfully, darkness did not vanish, it softened, becoming the fertile soil from which Rebecca's new sense of self slowly grew. She had been burned, yes, but not consumed. In the sanctuary of her reclaimed life, she understood that pain was not simply a wound, but a crucible, shaping her into a woman less idealistic, but far more whole. In quiet moments, she allowed herself to mourn again, not just the family that was lost, but the old versions of herself she'd outgrown. She whispered silent thank yous to the universe for every lesson disguised as heartache. And when she caught her reflection late at night, preparing for sleep after a day spent entirely on her own terms, she met her gaze with something close to pride. Rebecca realized, with a certainty that pierced the last of her old illusions, that rebirth had not meant returning to who she was. It meant making peace with who she had become, the ending, consequences, and forgiveness. Summer had come to Manhattan, its afternoons lighting up the city in golden haze. Rebecca's townhouse, now a space of quiet solidity, reflected the profound changes within her. The months since the night of truth had passed slowly, marked by healing, solitude, and a persistent reckoning with the past. Yet she knew there were stories not yet closed, wounds unhealed. Justice had been secured, but forgiveness for herself and others was still unresolved. The first consequence for Ethan and Sophie was public and relentless. Word of the betrayal spread quickly, a ripple in their affluent social circles, a shock within the extended family, a subject of unspoken conversations at work, at charity functions, even at casual gatherings. Ethan's career at the law firm faltered. His sharp-eyed colleagues, who once admired him, now glanced past as he entered meeting rooms. Clients hesitated, uncertain if they trusted a partner whose name was now tied to scandal. Ethan soldiered on, but his laughter grew less frequent, shoulders more slumped, unmistakably marked by regret. Sophie suffered in her own way. Mutual friends stopped inviting her to brunches and gallery openings. Even those who sympathized kept their distance, too uncomfortable to ask what had happened, unwilling to take sides. Her phone was suddenly silent. The little community she depended on evaporated. Sophie withdrew, not out of pride, but penance. She moved to a smaller apartment in Brooklyn and started over, taking a job teaching cooking classes at a community center. For the first time, she faced life without her family's safety net, the consequences of her choices landing squarely on her own shoulders. To some, these consequences might have seemed cruel, but Rebecca did not wish humiliation or hardship on either of them. She had once believed love could outlast any betrayal. Now she saw that pain, inescapable as it was, wasn't something to be avoided, but something to be lived through, accepted, and eventually released. The hardest journey, though, was her own. In the weeks after the legal dust settled, Rebecca found herself standing at the edge of something vast and invisible. She had won back her home, her assets, her public pride, but late at night, she often lay awake, sifting through memories, her wedding day, childhood laughs with Sophie, an ordinary morning when all had seemed right, and wondered if she would ever feel whole again. Humid Sunday, as sunlight slanted through her kitchen window, Rebecca sat down with a blank journal. Its cover was sky blue, a color she'd once associated with hope. On the first page, she wrote a question. Forgiveness, she realized through therapy and reflection, was not a simple act, but a series of smaller choices. It was not excusing the pain inflicted or pretending that what happened could be made right. Rather, it was allowing herself to put down the burden of resentment, to recognize the humanity and the failings in those who had hurt her, and more importantly, to recognize her own. In the spirit of moving forward, she took the first step. Rebecca arranged to meet Sophie at Sophie's suggestion in a little park they'd loved as girls. The air was thick with the scent of linden trees and distant shouts of children. Sophie arrived quietly, a shadow of her once boisterous self, wrists twisting with nerves. Rebecca broke their silence. "You wanted to talk." Sophie nodded, tears already brimming. "I know I don't deserve your time. I wanted to thank you for not making it uglier, for letting me learn from this, even though it hurt you most. I'm still so sorry." She paused, looking down at her hands. "I know I can't take it back, but want you to know I will spend a lifetime trying to be better than the person I was." For a while, Rebecca could only listen, feeling the familiar ache. In Sophie's hurt, she saw a reflection of her own. She thought about how holding on to rage had eroded her joy, how slowly she'd begun to let go. Not for Sophie, not for Ethan, but for herself. "I appreciate you saying that," Rebecca finally replied. "I'm not ready for trust, but I don't want to keep hating you. We're always sisters. Maybe someday we can find a different way forward." They parted without an embrace, but also without bitterness. It was an imperfect peace, and that was enough. A month later, Ethan reached out through Julia, requesting a civil meeting to discuss final paperwork and arrangements for mutual friends. Rebecca, armed with boundaries, agreed to meet at a public cafe. Ethan, thinner, older somehow, greeted her with none of his old bravado. He apologized quietly, not arguing, not pleading. "I have no right to ask your forgiveness," he said, "but I want to say what I did was selfish. I wasn't the man I should have been, and I've lost more than I'll ever be able to explain. I hope you'll find happiness, Rebecca. You deserve it." She nodded, a strange, gentle sadness in her chest. "I'll find it. But I hope you do too, after you've earned it." There was no need for further words. Justice, it seemed, was closure, but forgiveness was possibility. Little by little, Rebecca crafted a new chapter for herself, a life defined not by shadows, but by resilience. She traveled, sometimes with friends, sometimes alone, determined to see new things and meet herself anew in different places. She established a grant at her company for women starting over after personal loss. She gave talks about growth through adversity, not sharing the gory details, but the wisdom gained. And on quiet evenings, Sitting on her balcony, as the city breathed below, Rebecca thought less often of what was taken from her and more about what she had built. A self that was neither untouchable nor unbreakable, but open to hope again. Sometimes she thought about Sophie's letter, about Ethan's apology, and realized the past would always be with her, but it would not rule her. The story closed not on fairy tale reunions, but on open windows and quiet beginnings. Rebecca believed she could forgive, not in a grand, dramatic gesture, but through simple acts of kindness to herself and, when she was able, to those who had wronged her. Forgiveness, in the end, was not release for the betrayers, but for herself, a gentle, uncompromising reclamation of peace. She did not know what the future would hold, but as she looked out at the city, its lights winking in the early dark, Rebecca felt anchored, not by family, not by perfect love, but by the strength she had found in surviving, and the promise that whatever came next, it would be on her own unwavering terms.